Welcome back, everyone, to The Unseen Wisdom. And if you're new around here, be sure to like and comment and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future deep dives. If you've been following our recent episodes, well, we've been really trying to untangle this whole conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And today we're going to be going even deeper, focusing on some of the latest developments and asking the tough question like, what are they hiding from us?
Yeah, it certainly feels like we're peeling back layers of an onion here, with each new revelation kind of revealing a more intricate and concerning situation. And just based on what we're seeing in the news lately, there's definitely this sense that something isn't quite right. That we're not getting the full picture.
Yeah, exactly. Like, take the recent SADC meeting in Zimbabwe. On the surface, it seemed like, okay, this is a step towards peace.
Sure.
They condemned the attacks on SADC forces. They announced the repatriation of the fallen and injured South African soldiers. And they reaffirmed their commitment to finding a diplomatic resolution through things like the Luanda and Nairobi processes.
Right, but here's where things get a little bit interesting. Those processes, while they're, well-intentioned, they've been plagued by delays and lack of, tangible progress. And plus, the absence of some key players from that SADC meeting. It definitely raises some eyebrows. The presidents of Angola, Namibia, DRC, and Zambia were all missing.
That's a pretty big deal, right? I mean, if they're serious about finding a solution, you would think that all the major stakeholders would be there.
Exactly. Their absence kind of suggests that there are some deeper divisions and disagreements within SADC about how to even approach this conflict. It undermines the whole image of unity that they're trying to project. And it just makes you wonder if there's more to the story than meets the eye.
Right. It's like they're sending these mixed signals. On the one hand, they're talking about peace and diplomacy. But on the other hand, there's this underlying tension and this lack of real commitment from some of the key players.
And that brings us to a point that was raised by a YouTube commentator that I came across. This idea that South Africa, not Zimbabwe, is in the hot seat to act decisively in the DRC. They even went so far as to call Zimbabwe's role as the SADC chair ceremonial, which suggests this perception that Zimbabwe might lack the influence or the will to truly drive a solution, leaving South Africa to shoulder the burden.
That's fascinating because South Africa has definitely faced their own share of criticism for their involvement. And we can't ignore the explosive statements made by Julius Malema, who's been incredibly vocal in his opposition to South Africa's military presence in the DRC.
Yeah, Malema's stance is definitely provocative. He's calling for the immediate withdrawal of South African troops, accusing President Ramaphosa of sending them into a deadly trap, jeopardizing their lives to protect, capitalist and mining interests, rather than genuine peace.
And he doesn't stop there. He also argues that South Africa's military capacity has been intentionally weakened, leaving their soldiers ill-equipped to handle such a, complex and volatile conflict. He suggests that they're trying to play this USA of Africa role, but they just lack the resources and the strategic understanding to really pull it off.
Yeah, it's a harsh critique, but it does raise some valid points. There have been reports of South African soldiers lacking essential equipment, facing logistical challenges in the DRC, and this raises serious concerns about their ability to effectively carry out their mission and to protect themselves in such a hostile environment.
And if Malema is right, that South Africa is meddling in a situation they don't fully understand, it begs the question, what are the real motivations behind their involvement? Is it truly about peace and stability? Or are there other interests at play here?
It's difficult to say for sure, but the accusations of protecting economic interests, particularly in the mining sector, those are hard to ignore. The DRC is incredibly rich in minerals that are just crucial for modern technology, and there's a long history of exploitation and conflict driven by these resources.
So we have South Africa caught in this web of criticism and accusations, with Malema on one side arguing they're in over their heads and risking lives for the wrong reasons, and others suggesting they're the only ones with the power to make a real difference. It's a complicated situation, to say the least.
Yeah, it is. And it becomes even more complicated when you factor in the role of Rwanda, a country with a long and contentious history with both the DRC and South Africa.
Right. President Kagame hasn't held back in his criticism of President Ramaphosa, accusing him of distorting the truth and launching deliberate attacks against Rwanda. And this isn't just some recent spat. Their animosity goes back years, including a diplomatic expulsion of Rwandan officials by South Africa back in 2014.
Exactly, and that history of distrust and tension certainly colors their current interactions. But what's really intriguing is Kagame's recent admission that he can't stop the flow of smuggled minerals from the DRC. And he even goes so far as to say that much of it ends up in Tel Aviv.
Whoa, That's quite a statement. On
Yeah.
one hand, he's acknowledging the existence of this illicit trade that's fueling the conflict and profiting off of the DRC's instability. But on the other hand, he's claiming powerlessness to stop it, essentially shifting the blame elsewhere. What are we supposed to make of this?
It's a calculated move.
Yeah.
And it's definitely open to interpretation. Is it an attempt to deflect responsibility? Or is he trying to expose a larger network of complicity? Is he implying that powerful external actors are benefiting from this conflict and hindering genuine efforts to establish peace?
And let's not forget about the elephant in the room. The M23 rebels themselves. They've been making some alarming advances. They captured Goma, the largest city in eastern DRC, and they're even threatening to march on Kinshasa, the capital. This isn't just some small-scale insurgency. They seem to be a formidable force.
Absolutely. The M23 are well-armed and organized. They're utilizing sophisticated equipment, including night vision goggles, anti-drone missiles, and GPS jamming systems. UN reports have even linked some of this weaponry to Rwanda, which further fuels those suspicions about their involvement and really raises the stakes of the conflict.
So we have South African soldiers potentially caught in a trap, a regional power dynamic riddled with mistrust and hidden agendas, a rebel group with advanced weaponry and growing ambitions, and a global demand for the DRC's resources that seems to be fueling the conflict. It's a tangled web indeed. And the question remains, what are they hiding from us?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And as we delve deeper into this conflict, we need to keep our eyes peeled for those subtle clues, those inconsistencies and contradictions that hint at a hidden reality.
Well, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. I'm eager to see where this investigation leads.
I suspect you won't be disappointed. The DRC conflict is like a puzzle box. And with each piece we uncover, we get closer to understanding the true nature of this complex and tragic situation. And speaking of uncovering pieces of the puzzle, let's go back to President Kagame's statement about those smuggled minerals ending up in Tel Aviv. You might be wondering, why he would make such a pointed remark.
Yeah, I am actually. It seems like he's implicating Israel in this conflict, suggesting that they're benefiting from this illicit mineral trade. But is that really what he's doing? It feels like there's a deeper game at play here.
Exactly. Kagame is known for his strategic maneuvering and calculated pronouncements. And by bringing Israel into the equation, he's potentially shifting the narrative, trying to portray Rwanda as a victim of a larger system of exploitation rather than a perpetrator.
So it's a way of deflecting blame, perhaps even garnering sympathy from those who see Israel as a powerful player with its own interests in the region.
Precisely, he's playing on existing geopolitical tensions and perceptions to present Rwanda as caught in the middle, forced to deal with the consequences of a problem they didn't create.
That's a clever tactic. But it also raises a crucial question for us as observers. Is it working? Is the international community buying into this narrative? Or are they seeing through it and recognizing Rwanda's role in the conflict?
That's where things get a little bit murky. There's no clear consensus on Rwanda's involvement. While UN reports have pointed to their support for the M23 rebels, Rwanda vehemently denies these accusations. And without concrete evidence or a willingness from the international community to impose consequences, it's really difficult to hold them accountable.
And that brings us back to South Africa's predicament. If Rwanda is indeed playing this double game, supporting the rebels while claiming innocence, it makes South Africa's mission even more complicated. They're essentially trying to broker peace in a situation where one of the key players might not actually want peace.
Yeah, that's the risk they're taking. And this is precisely where Malema's critique gains some traction. He argues that South Africa is wading into a quagmire, a conflict where the lines between friend and foe are blurred, and the motives of those involved are shrouded in secrecy.
So is Malema right? Is this a fool's errand, a trap that South Africa has walked into blindly? Or is there still a chance for them to salvage the situation and achieve a lasting peace?
That's the question that keeps me up at night. And to answer it, we really need to examine the potential motivations behind South Africa's involvement. What are they hoping to achieve? And is it even achievable given the complex web of interests and alliances in the region?
Okay, let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Putting aside Malema's criticisms and focusing on the potential benefits, why would South Africa be so invested in this conflict? What's in it for them?
Well, one compelling argument is that South Africa sees itself as a regional leader, responsible for maintaining stability in southern Africa. The DRC's instability has a ripple effect on neighboring countries, creating refugee crises, security threats, and economic disruptions. From this perspective, intervention in the DRC isn't just about altruism. It's about protecting South Africa's own interests.
So it's a strategic move to prevent the chaos from spilling over into their own backyard.
Exactly. They're trying to contain the conflict and prevent it from escalating into a regional crisis. That could destabilize the entire area. There's also the economic aspect to consider. The DRC's vast mineral wealth isn't only attractive to international corporations, but also to neighboring countries who might see an opportunity to benefit from the instability. By stabilizing the region, South Africa could potentially secure its own access to those resources and prevent others from gaining an unfair advantage.
Okay, that makes sense. But isn't there a risk that they're overextending themselves? Malema argues that their military capacity is simply not up to the task, that they're not equipped to handle a conflict of this scale and complexity.
He's right to raise those concerns. The South African military has faced budget cuts and internal challenges in recent years, and there are legitimate questions about their ability to sustain a long-term military presence in the DRC. And if they're not careful, they could find themselves bogged down in a costly and unwinnable conflict, further draining their resources and weakening their position.
So it's a gamble, with potentially high stakes. They're hoping to achieve stability and protect their interests, but they're risking a lot in the process.
Exactly, and that's the dilemma they're facing. Do they continue to invest resources and manpower into a conflict that seems to have no end in sight? Or do they heed Malema's warnings and withdraw, risking further destabilization and potentially ceding influence to other regional actors?
It's a tough call, and there are no easy answers. But one thing is clear. The stakes are incredibly high, not just for South Africa, but for the entire region. And the choices they make will have far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely. And as we continue to unpack this complex situation, it's crucial to keep those consequences in mind. Because behind the political maneuvering and strategic calculations, there are real people whose lives are being impacted by this conflict.
You're right, we can't lose sight of the human cost of this conflict.
Which brings us to another crucial aspect of this story: the role of international corporations and the global demand for the DRC's resources. Because while regional rivalries and political ambitions certainly play a part, the insatiable appetite for minerals like cobalt and coltan is a major driver of the conflict.
And this is where it gets personal for all of us, right? Because those minerals are essential for our smartphones, electric cars, and countless other technologies that we rely on every day.
Exactly. We're all implicated in this conflict to some extent, whether we realize it or not. Our consumer choices are fueling the demand, which in turn incentivizes the exploitation of the DRC's resources, often at the expense of human rights and environmental sustainability.
So it's not just about distant governments and rebel groups fighting over territory. It's about a global system that profits from conflict and instability, with multinational corporations playing a key role in perpetuating the cycle of violence.
Precisely. And that raises a crucial question: what is our responsibility as consumers? Can we continue to enjoy the benefits of these technologies without acknowledging the human cost and environmental impact?
It's a question we all need to grapple with, and it highlights the need for greater transparency and accountability in the global supply chains for these minerals. We need to know where these resources are coming from and under what conditions they're being extracted.
Absolutely. And it's not just about awareness. We need to demand that companies operate responsibly, that they source their materials ethically, and take steps to mitigate the negative impacts of their operations.
So it's a multifaceted challenge. We need to address the regional power dynamics, hold Rwanda accountable for its actions, support South Africa's efforts while also acknowledging their limitations, and fundamentally rethink the way we consume and produce technology.
It might seem overwhelming, but each step we take towards greater awareness, transparency, and accountability brings us closer to a more just and sustainable future for the DRC and its people.
Well said. But before we delve further into the ethical implications of this conflict, let's take a step back and consider the historical context.
That's a great idea, because to understand the present, we need to understand the past.
Exactly. And the DRC's history is a complex tapestry of colonialism, exploitation, and political turmoil. That has left deep scars on the nation's psyche and continues to shape the current situation.
Yeah, let's start with the brutal legacy of Belgian colonialism, which left the DRC ill-prepared for independence and sowed the seeds of division and conflict that persist to this day.
Right. The Belgians extracted vast amounts of wealth from the Congo, exploiting its resources and brutally suppressing any resistance. They also implemented a system of divide and rule, pitting different ethnic groups against each other to maintain control. And when the country gained independence in 1960, it was plunged into chaos and instability, with various factions vying for power.
And that instability created a vacuum that was quickly filled by external actors, eager to exploit the DRC's resources and strategic location. Cold War rivalries played out on Congolese soil, with the US and Soviet Union supporting different factions, further fueling the conflict.
And let's not forget the role of Mobutu Sese Seko, who seized power in a coup in 1965 and ruled the country with an iron fist for over 3 decades. His regime was characterized by corruption, human rights abuses, and a systematic plundering of the DRC's wealth.
Mobutu's legacy continues to haunt the DRC, even though he was ousted in 1997. He left behind a country with weak institutions, a culture of impunity, and deep-seated resentment towards the political elite.
And when Mobutu fell, the DRC was plunged into another civil war, this time involving multiple neighboring countries and various rebel groups, each with their own agendas and alliances. This conflict, known as the First Congo War, lasted from 1996 to 1997 and resulted in the deaths of millions of people.
And despite a peace agreement in 1999, the conflict never truly ended. The Second Congo War, which lasted from 1998 to 2003, involved even more actors and resulted in even greater devastation. This conflict became known as Africa's World War, due to the involvement of 9 African countries and numerous armed groups.
It was a horrific chapter in the DRC's history, marked by widespread human rights abuses, including mass killings, sexual violence, and the displacement of millions of people. And even though a peace agreement was signed in 2003, the underlying issues that fueled the conflict remained unresolved.
And that brings us to the present day, where the DRC is still grappling with the legacy of its tumultuous past. The institutions are weak, corruption is rampant, and the country is plagued by armed groups vying for control of resources and territory.
So it's clear that the current conflict is not simply a product of recent events. It's rooted in decades of exploitation, political instability, and external interference. And to understand the complexities of this situation, we need to acknowledge that historical context.
Absolutely, because without understanding the past, we can't hope to build a more peaceful and sustainable future for the DRC.
Well said. So we've delved into the history, examined the regional power dynamics, explored the role of South Africa, and considered the global demand for the DRC's resources. But we still haven't answered the central question: what are they hiding from us? What are the hidden agendas, the unspoken truths that are shaping this conflict?
That's the million-dollar question, and while we might not have all the answers, we can start by looking for clues in the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the things that don't quite add up.
Okay, let's put on our detective hats and see what we can uncover. We know that Rwanda has been accused of supporting the M23 rebels, but they vehemently deny any involvement. But then we have President Kagame admitting that he can't stop the flow of smuggled minerals from the DRC, essentially acknowledging that Rwanda is benefiting from the conflict.
Right, that's a major red flag. If they're not involved, why are they profiting from the instability? And why are those minerals ending up in Tel Aviv? Is Kagame trying to expose a larger network of complicity, or is he simply deflecting blame?
And then we have South Africa caught in the middle of this complex situation. They're trying to broker peace. But you're facing criticism from both sides. Malema accuses them of being naive and risking the lives of their soldiers for the wrong reasons, while others suggest they're the only ones with the power to make a real difference.
And their motivations are not entirely clear either. Are they genuinely committed to peace and stability in the region, or are they primarily concerned with protecting their own interests and preventing the conflict from spilling over into their own territory?
It's a tangled web of alliances, rivalries, and hidden agendas. And as we dig deeper, we need to be wary of the narratives being spun by the different actors.
Absolutely. We need to be critical thinkers, questioning assumptions, and looking for evidence to support the claims being made.
And we need to remember that behind all the political maneuvering and strategic calculations, there are real people whose lives are being impacted by this conflict.
That's right. We can't lose sight of the human cost.
This is a complex and evolving story, and we'll continue to follow it closely, bringing you the latest developments and analysis. In the meantime, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the DRC conflict? What questions do you have? Feels like we're only scratching the surface here. Like every time we think we're getting close to the truth, another layer of complexity is just revealed.
It's like that quote. You know the one about the fish not knowing about water? Because they're surrounded by it. We're swimming in a sea of information, but the real truth, the why behind it all, it's often invisible, mathed by the agendas of those in power.
So how do we break through that? How do we, as you said, see the water? Because the people of the DRC, they don't have the luxury of ignoring this conflict. This is their reality. These are their lives at stake.
You're absolutely right, and that's what makes these deep dives so crucial. By piecing together the information from the news, analyzing the discrepancies, highlighting the human impact, we can start to connect those dots, see the patterns, and hopefully help others do the same.
So where do we go from here? What are the key takeaways, the things our listeners should be paying attention to as the story continues to unfold?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's crucial to maintain a healthy skepticism. Don't take anything at face value. Question the narratives that are being presented, especially by those with vested interests in the conflict.
So be critical consumers of information, especially when it comes to the DRC.
Exactly. Look for independent sources. Analyze the motives of those speaking. Pay attention to what's not being said, those gaps in the story.
Yeah.
That might hold some crucial clues.
And what about the ethical implications? We touched on the role of international corporations and the demand for conflict minerals. What can our listeners do to be more responsible consumers?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Because these supply chains are so complex and opaque. But I think even small actions can make a difference. Research the companies you support, their sourcing practices, and their commitment to ethical and sustainable operations.
So use your purchasing power wisely. Support the companies that are making an effort to source responsibly, even if it costs a bit more.
Exactly, and advocate for greater transparency and accountability from those companies. Demand to know where their materials are coming from and what steps they're taking to mitigate the negative impacts of their operations.
It sounds like we all have a role to play in addressing this conflict, even if we're thousands of miles away.
Absolutely. Awareness is the first step. By educating ourselves and others about the complexities of the DRC conflict, we can start to challenge the status quo and push for meaningful change.
And that's what the unseen wisdom is all about, right? Uncovering the hidden truths, exploring the complexities, and empowering our listeners to think critically and engage with the world around them.
Precisely. We're not just here to entertain, we're here to inform, to inspire, and to hopefully make a small contribution towards a more just and equitable world.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, but this is just the beginning. The DRC conflict is a complex and evolving situation, and we'll continue to follow it closely.
And as always, we encourage you to continue the conversation, share your thoughts in the comments, ask questions, and let's keep digging together.
Because the truth, as they say, is out there. We just need to be brave enough to look for it.
And persistent enough to keep asking those tough questions.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to The Unseen Wisdom for more insightful explorations into the unseen forces shaping our world.
Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.